welcome to Gwinnett County Public Library's Meet the Author series. My name is Denise, and I'm here this evening with you to host Elizabeth Musser in conversation with Sharon Garlo Brown. Elizabeth Musser is the best-selling author of at least a dozen novels, which have been printed in multiple languages and become international bestsellers. The newest book, however, is part of her very famous Swan series. The moderator for the program, again, is Sharon Garlo Brown, and she is an author, a spiritual director, and a retreat speaker, and she is known for her Sensible Shoes series of books. But her latest book, An Extra Mile, was awarded Christianity Today's Fiction Book of the Year. Please help me welcome Elizabeth Musser and Sharon Garlo Brown. Thank you.
It's a joy to be with all of you. And I'm tuning in from a rather wintry West Michigan tonight. So it's nice to join you in the warmer South, and a delight to be with you tonight, Elizabeth, my dear friend, to talk about this new book of yours.
Great to be here, and bonjour everyone. And I'm in Flintstone, Georgia. So yabba dabba doo. Pebbles and Bam Bam are downstairs, and yeah, it's great and it actually is warm here. It has gotten cold in the past couple of weeks, but today it was in the 60s. So yeah, we're spoiled here, but very, very delighted to be with you, Sharon.
Well, and I'm so excited about talking about this new book because we share a common love for pilgrimage, both the external journey, if you will, and also the interior journey of that. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Elizabeth, can you just tell us a little bit about this theme of pilgrimage in the Promised Land and where you got your inspiration from?
Sure. So my husband Paul and I have been involved in missions work in Europe for over 35 years. And for most of those years, well, for about the first 20 years, we were working in French churches in France. We were helping kind of build up and encourage French believers. So for that time, our ministry was more with the French people. But about 10 years ago, the president of our mission is called One Collective. It used to be called International Teams, asked Paul and me to move into a different role, and it's called pastoral care. And pastoral care, it's member care. It's basically, we were asked to kind of be the pastors for the missionaries in our mission. In Europe and in North Africa. And since then, we've also been involved with our missionaries all over the world. So one of the groups, so we started visiting people in Europe, visiting the teams that were doing all kinds of different ministries. And one of the ministries was in Santiago, Spain. And Santiago, Spain is the end of the Camino pilgrimage. And this young team was starting a welcome center in Santiago. And what it was for is when pilgrims come from all over the world and they can hike many different trails. But if they do the whole Camino, they eventually end up in Santiago at a cathedral where legend has it that the remains of Saint James the Apostle are. But often you've walked for hundreds of kilometers. You come to the end of this very deep experience and it's done. And the Pilgrim House is a welcome center where you can come in and just process. It's just talk about what has pilgrimage meant. And again, people come for all different reasons. It used to be very much a Catholic pilgrimage, but now people come for all different reasons. And they're processing something, and our workers were there to listen. So that was the first time I really had heard of the Camino. Have you heard of were you familiar with the Camino for many years, Sharon?
No, it's just been in the last 10 to 15. Yeah.
I think it's gotten more popular in the past, probably 15 years because, especially 10 years, maybe because I think there's a renewed interest in pilgrimage because we want to get away from our devices. We need silence in our head. And so I think that's, so anyway, that was the first time I heard of the Camino, and I love hiking and walking. And so I was like, ooh, I'd like to do that sometime. And then about 2 years ago, I actually got brave and went on the first for 3 days. I walked a part of the Camino in France alone. And that, a lot of pilgrims walk alone for a long time, but that was about all I could do. But I loved it, and it was quite an experience. And that, I think, Sharon and I both love to travel and kind of put things from our travels in our novels, I think. And so that was, when you can actually see the terrain and walk it, you get so many experiences. So that was, I was already starting the book, but that was very much helped me write about pilgrimage. So I just blab. But anyway, that's the initial thing.
Yeah. And before we even get into the book, Elizabeth, can we talk a little bit about what you discovered on the Camino? So you were walking by yourself, although I've learned from you, there's a saying on the Camino that you're never alone.
Right.
So was there anything that stands out that surprised you?
So that was the first thing that surprised me. I had heard, stories from pilgrims and from our workers in Santiago about what the Camino meant. And I was like, okay, yeah, why not? And, but that idea of never being alone. So I went to the city of Le Puy-en-Velay, and that's about, it's in southeastern France, and it's one of the starting points. And so I'd done my research on internet and talked to some friends who had just walked the Camino, fortunately, because they gave me I was kind of a starry-eyed idealist. I was just going to go walk. I didn't really have a great backpack. They told me.
Did you have good shoes?
I had shoes. I had 2 pair of shoes. I had walking poles. Thank the Lord that they told me you need walking poles. And I borrowed a nice backpack. But when I got there, I found out that there was a welcome party or welcome apéro, a welcome evening for pilgrims at the cathedral. So there's a little room behind the cathedral. And if you're going to start the walk the next day, you can go. So I went, and it was, we're in France, and there were probably maybe 10 of us. It was late in the season, so there weren't as many pilgrims. And Jean-Marc was the leader, and he started talking to us, and he offered us a kir, which is white wine with crème de cassis. And I thought, it looked like Kool-Aid, but being in France, I knew the French are going to offer wine. So we had our little wine, and he asked each of us to tell a little bit about ourselves. And as he started, he said, or as we introduced ourselves, he said, "You are never," well, I said, I'm going up by myself. And he looked at me and he said, "You're never alone on the Camino." And I thought, they really do say that. That really is. And at one point I thought, yeah, of course, because as a Christian, I believe that Jesus goes with me. I mean, this was more of a spiritual thing for me, but he didn't talk about that. He said, you will make friends on the Camino in such a different way. And there is a bond that happens that is almost inexplicable as you're walking. And you may be walking by yourself, but you'll cross paths with other pilgrims. And one thing that happened to me that was just so sweet. I started out walking up this big hill by myself, and there was no one around. And I look back down at the town of Le Puy. It's a gorgeous town. And I do have photos and videos on my Facebook and Instagram accounts of the pilgrimage. But it was a pretty steep hike to start out with. And I looked behind me, and there was this young man walking very quickly up the hill. And turned out he was from Poland. And I'll call him Patrick. But Patrick had walked from his home in Poland to France, and he was going all the way to Santiago, and he didn't speak a word of French, but he spoke beautiful English, and he was just dying to speak English. So he just started chatting, and it was like the Lord sent my son with me. He was the exact same age as my son, and just such a sweet guy. And so he started walking with me, and I just, it was, how do I say it? He became, an angel walking beside me, I suppose. And
it's a beautiful way to describe it.
But the only thing I was a little afraid because he was 27, and I'm like, I'm not going to walk as fast as you. Well, he just slowed down and he followed me. And he walked with me. And after about, 4 or 5 hours, I was like, okay, maybe he can go on. I needed, because I was planning on some time just to reflect. But as we got to this little town, there were all these German pilgrims that we met a few of them the night before, but they had a big picnic, and they invited us to have this picnic with them. And evidently they're from a church in Germany, and every year they do a part of the Camino. And this year they were doing the part we were doing, and there may be 10 or 15 of them, and each day one of them brings their minivan and follows them, and once in a while they'll stop and put out this lavish picnic. And we were starving.
Like
we were like,
feeding, kind of, or is that hospitality? What do you think?
I call it the luxury brand of the Camino. I also did that because I found out dear Patrick was carrying his backpack, his tent, everything. He wasn't even going to stay in hostels. But I found out you can have just your backpack for what you need for the day, your water, your shoes, just the essentials. And you can have a little suitcase that you leave at each place you stay. And there's something called, there's a little minivan that'll come and pick up your suitcase and take it to the next place. So I did the luxury because I had my computer. I wanted to write, and I didn't want to carry my computer with me. Anyway, but I just think seeing him, and then there was this other man. It turns out he was the equivalent of a SEAL in a Navy SEAL. He was French though. And I met him the first night too, when we were having a little wine, and he, big, strong guy. I didn't know he was walking for 3 months, and I ran into him that first day, and I could tell he was that he was working out some big things in his life. And we had a lovely conversation. He was going very slow and deliberately. And 2 nights later, I was staying at this hostel, and there's only one other person that was going to show up because this is the end of the season. And it turned out it was my friend. I'll call him Jean. And Jean, he said, I thought it was going to be you that was here. And we talked all night. He had the morning that you start your Camino. I started in a cathedral. They have a mass at 7 a.m. It is beautiful, a pilgrim's mass. And they give you a blessing. So we have a little blessing. This is in French, but they read a beautiful pilgrim blessing. I will read it in a moment. But they also give a gospel of Mark. And my friend Jean was reading the gospel every night, and he wanted to talk about it. And then he opened up about his life. And then you are invited each night, wherever you're staying, you eat a meal, and it's prepared with food grown in the region, and the hosts are there because they love pilgrims, and they've probably had their own pilgrimage, and you just talk and in different languages, and it's quite the experience. Yeah. But those two guys became friends in the course of a few hours, and we shared our souls. We didn't talk about football or Facebook or our devices. We talked about pilgrimage. Yeah. So again, it for me, there was time alone with the Lord, and there was plenty of time alone where I was like, I'm glad I have my cell phone, because if I fall, there's nobody out here. But there was time also with others, and just that sweet camaraderie and that knitting together of spirits. And I loved it so much that I loved taking my 4 main characters in the Promised Land and letting that happen, letting this very serendipitous but holy kind of friendship begin because of you're never alone.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Elizabeth, you mentioned having your computer and writing. Did you know when you were walking the Camino that you would be giving that journey to these particular characters, or did that kind of emerge later? What was the process like for you?
So I knew some of them would be there, but I think I had sent a proposal in to my publisher, but I had started just a little bit of the book, and I had some characters in mind, but once I walked the Camino, they changed. The characters changed because they became more, their issues their issues were personified, I guess, on the Camino. And so for sure it having that experience deepened, I think, the way I explored my characters. And I don't know. I mean, to me, it's just an extra, very much a privilege to be able to have walked that. And my descriptions were much richer also because I did it. And my, the things that happened, some of them happened to me. And I think, I'd love to hear your thought about this, but I think there's a little bit of us in our characters, whatever, even if we're writing fantasy, which I don't write, or historical fiction when it's not present day, but there's a bit of us that gets in, or a bit of people that we know and love. And often my friends will say, was that me, that conversation? And I'll say, if you think that you're in my book, you are. It's a wink. It's just a wink. No one else in the world will know. And it's usually a positive wink, hopefully. But anyway, yeah, so my characters kind of transformed because of the journey, I would say. They were there, but they grew on me.
Yeah, you journeyed with them as you were listening to their stories and what they were discovering.
Yeah. Do you find that also?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But one of the things I really appreciated, Elizabeth, is your descriptions are so rich, both the inner life of the characters and the physical journey. Would you talk to us, introduce us to your characters and tell us a little bit about what they discovered, what they were wrestling with as they were walking, and how the Lord met them as they walked?
Great question. So in this particular novel, I have 3 protagonists, which means 3 characters, main characters who are narrating, and they each narrate in their own voice. So in the first person, and the main character is Abby, and Abby is I've kind of promoted this book as the 3rd book in the Swan House series. And the books, The Swan House, The Dwelling Place, and The Promised Land, can all be read, they're standalone. You don't have to read the others. But if you have read The Swan House, Abby is Mary Swan. Mary Swan's the main character in The Swan House, is her oldest daughter. And Abby is actually introduced in the very beginning of The Swan House. And Abby, we know from the previous books, is a perfectionist. And she has a lot of issues, but in this book, she starts out, her issue is control, holding so tightly onto and doing everything right. And so she has really micromanaged her family. She has 2 sons and a husband. And the book starts out where she finds out her older son is going on a gap year to Europe instead of going to one of the Ivy League colleges he got accepted in. And her younger son is going to a boarding school. So she's going to be an empty nester. And then right before both sons leave her, and she and her husband, Bill, are getting ready to move into a loft on the new Beltline in Atlanta. Bill says he's taking a break. And she's like, oh, I know it's been tough. And he's like, no, I'm taking a break from marriage. So here is Abby. Also, her beloved father, Robbie Bartholomew from the Swan House, is losing his memory. And so she is all of a sudden seeing her life unravel. And so so her issue is how to let go. What do you do when everything is taken away and when you're holding so much control and it's taken away? And even though I didn't know that COVID was coming when I wrote it, it's ironic because I think we all feel like things have been stripped away. Yeah. And one thing I loved about Abby, she is, she's this perfectionist. Well, she has a cross stitch. It is her husband's. He's about to turn 50 and she's planning this surprise party and she's going to take him to France. And she's done this cross stitch. It's a family tree for her husband. And it's this intricate, it's about 2 by 3 feet. It's huge. And she's worked on it for years. And and on the tree are all his favorite things, 50 of his favorite things. And, but the way she stitches it is if you turn over the cross stitch, it is perfect on the back too. So this is Abby. This is Abby.
That tells us everything we need to know about her, doesn't it?
Yeah. So it's her life is coming unraveled. What does she do? And so that is her journey. Her son, Bobby, is the second main character. And Bobby was, trying to get away from his mom. And he is an artist at heart. And Mary Swan, his grandmother, beloved grandmother, is encouraging him to pursue his dreams. So he's going to do a gap year. And his mom obviously isn't very happy about it. And she wasn't planning. I mean, she begrudgingly let him do his gap year. But then when her husband left her, she just, and Bobby is really a starry-eyed idealist. He goes over to Europe. His first service is at a ministry center for refugees, and he meets Rasa, who is one of the main characters in The Long Highway Home. And she's this beautiful young Iranian former refugee, and it's love at first sight. So when he happens to tell his mom that he is thinking of going on the Camino with Rasa, a former refugee, his mom freaks out. She drops everything and follows him on the Camino. He needs a chaperone. So
I bet he's thrilled.
He is very, but Bobby, his issue is he's responsible. He's the old soul in the family. He's worried for his mom, and he's worried for Rasa, and he's worried for his granddad who is sick, and his grandmom who is this beautiful painter. He paints with her, and he knows her hands are shaking, and so he's got all this he's caring about, and literally carrying that burden on his back. So Abby's burden is control. Bobby's burden is responsibility. And he wants to find his voice and his artist voice. And then the third main character is Caroline, or Carol. And she's a mess. She's a photojournalist. There's a way that she is related. I mean, anyway, she's French American. She has gone through, she's been a wandering pilgrim. She is an alcoholic. She is involved in, she's been in many relationships, but really what totally derailed her life was her best friend, 7 to 10 years ago, was kidnapped. And her best friend's mother was murdered, and Caroline feels responsible. And so her thing is, she's just got issues of what is life, how to make good decisions, and she has no spiritual background at all. So her brother and mother have become Christians, and that really irritates her. And she's just pounding out some big time anger, and she's dating, well, she's in love with, but a French guy named Bastien, and he's a mess. And I can't tell you too much about him, except for that I wrote him. I love Bastien. He was just being French. My editors hated him. Oh. And I had to make him less French. He was just being a French, a big flirt. The French are like, oh, a little side affair is no big deal. This is no. But anyway, Bastien, so Carol has she's trying to get over her friend's disappearance, and she's carrying this huge load of guilt. So there you go.
So they all have these burdens, and I love the images that you've woven in there with the cross stitch and the control and the unraveling that's happening. And Bobby, what he's taken on with the overdeveloped sense of responsibility. It's just beautiful how you've woven these themes together. Absolutely. Elizabeth, talk to us a little bit more, because you're so right that it ends up being such a timely read for us in the season of upheaval and loss and change. And so many of us are trying to make sense of a way forward, finding a new rhythm, a new way of being with one another, even as we're in this disembodied sort of existence. Talk to us a little bit about this theme of loss and change that runs through the book, and why that's been important to you.
So I think so in my other job, which is we call pastoral care, we are dealing with lots of missionaries, some who have just arrived on the field, some who've been there for a few years, some who've been there for decades. But one thing that we all understand is that when you go to a different culture, and it might not even be a different country, but a different culture, you know, you're going to go through culture shock.
Yeah.
And it's all these things that you lose. You lose closeness with your family. You lose proximity. You lose the familiarity of wherever you lived. You lose so many things that you lose, and it's culture shock. And as we have reflected on COVID year 2020, we've said, really, the whole world is going through culture shock.
Yeah.
And we, as in our role, through nothing that we had planned, we're a little bit more prepared, not because it was easy or anything, but we are used to culture shock. And so we know what that feels like to have your whole life upended and you lose control. And so I think that has been something that we've sat with our workers. And I feel like even with the readers too, just how do you navigate that? Because you can navigate it. You can learn something new. And we often talk with our workers about seasons. And we're at different seasons. And that has always been a really important theme. Just acknowledging seasons has been so important to me in my life as a mom and wife and missionary and writer. And it doesn't mean the season is going to last forever. But I think that what is important is asking those questions, right? And having a space to ask those questions. What do we do? And hasn't there been that solidarity? During confinement, the first 3 months, all those amazing choirs and the orchestras, and oh my goodness! And I just saw one last night. It's 50 different countries singing "Amazing Grace," and so I think what we're learning is we didn't have a choice. We had to let go because of COVID. We do have a choice of what to do with that.
Yes.
And the human race is resilient. Aren't we resilient? And we're going to make it. But I believe that the beauty in the despair almost of the whole COVID is that we also learn we're not alone. We are resilient, and there is a God who is not freaked out by COVID, and so we can ask some pretty hard questions. Mm-hmm. And I know that I've asked some hard questions, and a lot of our workers have too, in the midst of this, and finding His presence in the midst of great loss. And don't you think, don't you think that means you only have one way to answer, Sharon, but that when everything is stripped away, this is the theme of the book. And I want to show the back of the cover because it's so sweet. They put the theme here, but it says, you'd be surprised at what gets through when everything is taken away. And what has gotten through during COVID? I mean, there's been some pretty horrible things, but there've been some really beautiful things too. And so that's my takeaway in loss. I also love the thought that God doesn't waste our pain.
Yeah.
Nothing is wasted in our lives. There is that theme of redemption, and I love putting that in my books. I know you do too, but just, it's not wasted. It's not the end of the story. There is more, and how to embrace that, and also grief and gratitude. They're not mutually exclusive. There's so many things that are not mutually exclusive, and so let's push into the culture shock of loss. I'll get on my high horse for just one tiny moment.
Oh,
Please, let's love each other. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care about what platform you're on and social media. Can we love each other? Mm-hmm. It's okay to disagree, but can we disagree kindly? Because that is the sad part, that just this craziness, this hate that has come up, and I like to kind of be mean to my fellow believers, because I think we are some of the worst. I want us to be known for our love, not our hate. And so that's my shout out in this. Figure out a way to be a kind person, and ask God, or if you're not a believer, find a way to serve others and care. And if you have something, just, we learned as kids, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it. So please don't say it. So anyway, sorry, rant over.
Yeah, no, it's an important, as Christians, our call is to demonstrate what it means to lay down our lives in love. And so if we can practice seeing the opportunities to do that, even when it means restricting our own freedom for the sake of someone else. So that's sometimes what love looks like.
Yes.
Yeah. And, I love what you were saying, Elizabeth, about, this has been a pilgrimage during this season. Mm-hmm. And whether we're doing a literal pilgrimage like the Camino, but we're careful, we're mindful of what we leave behind, what we can't carry forward.
Yes.
And much of what we're discovering during the season is what we're meant not to be carrying forward. These stripping seasons, as you said, it's how the Lord shows us where we're placing our trust in things apart from him. And we can watch, these idols where we find our significance and our security and our worth. And the moment those things get stripped away and we feel the disorientation of it, it's a gift when those idols get exposed and removed. And that's the gift of pilgrimage, is whether we're doing, again, that literal pilgrimage, or along with that, the interior journey, which is so much a part of your work, especially in this book. So I'm thrilled. The convergence, it's such a time. And isn't that how God in his kindness works, right? He goes ahead of us. And often we are led to write more than what we understand in terms of what it means.
That word of prescience, something that we don't know, right? I know you've done this too. It's like, I didn't know this was going to be going on, but there was something that moved me to write that way. I wanted to say, as you were talking about pilgrimage too, that one thing that I'm offering because of COVID is that I have developed with Bethany House, my wonderful publisher. It's a passport, and it's called Creating Your Own Pilgrimage at Home. And basically it goes along with the themes of the book. And there's 10 walks that you can do as in your neighborhood, wherever. You can do it with friends. I'm encouraging book clubs also to do part of this. So we've created a passport. There's a literal physical passport like this, but if you sign up for my newsletter, you get a beautiful virtual passport. And if you're in a book club or something and would like to, and you're going to do the book, I'm happy to send you a passport. But it is, it gives us, what I wanted to do was give us a little theme for walking, and the idea of doing a mini pilgrimage. And so each day there is a little Bible verse and something, a theme from the book that you can reflect on. And the reason it's a passport is because the real Camino, every pilgrim gets a passport. And this is called a credencial, but in English it's a passport. And it's this thing. So you see, and on, let's see, I always have to find. So there are the little stamps. Each hostel you stay in has a stamp. And so for those who walk for months, they can have many, many stamps on this, but you carry it with you. And then at the end in Santiago, you show your passport. And so I wanted to give a little something for our readers because none of us can really go on the Camino. And I've actually loved talking to some of my readers who were going and it's been canceled. And so, so I do encourage all of us during this confined time to find a way to do some sort of pilgrimage. Now, it can be sitting in your chair at home, but it could be a walk because there's something physical there and a time of reflection. So,
Elizabeth, you also have some online resources with pilgrimage. You want to share about that as well?
Yes, so I have, I filmed this summer when I knew there was COVID and I wasn't going to be able to do in-person events. I filmed, I have like 51-minute videos or shorter of me in these different places, or sometimes I'm not there, thank goodness. I mean, I'm showing you, but of things that take place in the book. And so that is on my Facebook, and it's called the Promised Land Virtual Tour. And there's a lot of photos also. And once or twice a week, I post those. And then and on Instagram also, but you can also eventually go look at all of them if you want to. So that's available. That's something that I just want my readers to, it's fun to see some of the real scenery because it is absolutely gorgeous. I also have scenes from Provence where part of the novel takes place and little beautiful French town. So that's one thing. And then the virtual Camino is available. If you sign up for my newsletter, you get it immediately. And again, you can use that in any way you want. And then just my different events that I've done are available on my website and
give us that address, would you, Elizabeth?
It's just www.elizabethmusser.com.
I want to come back, Elizabeth, to something you were talking about at the beginning, where you said at the end there was an opportunity, the Welcome Center, for people to process what they had experienced. Mm-hmm. And you and I met really over a common love for spiritual direction, the ministry of spiritual direction, as a place to have someone help us process what we're noticing in our life with God. Do you want to say anything about your experience with that personally and why it's important for your characters in this book?
I'd love to. So 10 years ago, we started our pastoral care with our mission. And around that same time, a mutual friend in France introduced us to another couple they were Americans living in Lyon, where we live in the same city. And they were doing pastoral care for a different mission. And they had been doing it for several years. And they became our very informal mentors in that. So we both traveled a lot, but when we could get together, we would get together. But they also started talking about something. The woman's name is Letha. She's a very dear friend. And Letha was a spiritual director. I hadn't heard of spiritual direction. again, it's something that has existed for many years, but it's become, I think, like the Camino, it's become more popular. It's a lovely practice. There are many different flavors, but one of the first things I asked Letha if she could be my spiritual director, and so we meet once a month, and and basically it's just a time of reflection where we invite Jesus in, and Letha listens to me, I listen to the Holy Spirit, we listen together to what is happening in our lives in the present. But the first thing Letha did when I met with her as a spiritual director, we were already friends, she gave me this book. And this book was called Sensible Shoes. And she said, read this. And it was a novel, but it was about spiritual direction. And I was like, and I read that novel, which at the time was self-published. This was 10 years ago by this gal I'd never heard of. Her name is Sharon Garlo Brown. And that book was life-changing. It was so beautiful, and it just explained spiritual direction. And again, in the book, Sharon takes four women who don't know each other, and they come together for a type of a pilgrimage, almost a sacred journey in a church. They meet once every other week, and it's beautiful, the exchange that happens between these women. And there's actually 4 books in the series, but the Sensible Shoes was quite important to me for many, many reasons. But one is there's a character in this book who's kind of like my Abby. This character is called Hannah in Sharon's book. And Hannah is an assistant pastor, and she's a control freak and a workaholic. And at the beginning of the book, she is given a sabbatical, a 9-month forced sabbatical. And when I read that, I was edging up to burnout, and I bawled, and I said, I wish somebody would give me a 9-month sabbatical, because Hannah doesn't want it. I was so mad at her. I was like, good grief. But I started praying about that, and I talked to Letha about this reaction to this character in the book, and I sobbed, and I said, I know the Lord is wanting me to let some things go, but do missionaries get sabbaticals? I don't know. It's impossible. And I was getting ready to come home and do a whole huge furlough, which is not vacation. Anyway, there was a lot going on. And Letha, so in spiritual direction, you kind of sit there and you're quiet, and you get uncomfortably quiet sometimes. And then after a little while, Letha said, well, I don't usually quote Bible verses to my directees in spiritual direction, but I feel like the Lord wants me to say this to you. And she leans forward, she goes, you have not because you ask not. Mm. And I went, what? And so I started asking, and long story short, I was given, it was more a recovery from burnout, but it was like a sabbatical, and it was a precious, precious gift. And so what spiritual direction has meant to me is learning more about staying in the present with God, and that He is speaking, and that He really is involved in our life. And not that I didn't believe that, and not that I hadn't seen God show up many, many times in my life, but it was a slowing process, because when you're a perfectionist, as my son says, I'm a control freak. I'm a nice control freak, but I'm a control freak.
A control freak in recovery, Elizabeth.
Yes, that's right. That's good. But that slowing process, that noticing, there have just been a lot of techniques. And again, I think spiritual direction has been beautiful. It's a tool. A personality test is a tool. There's a lot of things that are tools. They don't let them become an idol, but it has been a practice that has been very helpful for me. And so I incorporated it into the novel. And what I loved doing also is Abby has a spiritual director. I love how she's very doubtful about this, but anyway, she gets a spiritual director who is a wise woman. But also Abby, during the course of her pilgrimage, thinks about her mother, who has been a mentor to her, and a woman named Miss Abigail, who was an inner city missionary in Atlanta in the 60s and was one of the main characters in The Swan House. And based on an amazing, one of the most amazing persons I've ever known, Louise Adamson. But, and Abby is named for Miss Abigail. And she thinks back, she's got to grieve some things about her mentors. And she also is thinking about the mentors. And so mentoring, spiritual direction, they're not exactly the same thing, but I like, don't we need mentors? And sometimes we don't realize that somebody has been that to us. Somebody has been an angel, a partner, a pilgrim with us. And so that, I like to bring that out. And I hope my readers will reflect on that too. Who has been that for you? Or can you have that? Or you have not because you ask not.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a beautiful story. Elizabeth, thank you for sharing that. I want to head into our chat box here and see if we have any questions. And please feel free, friends, to submit questions for Elizabeth or for me. We're happy to answer. So question is, what is the next book? Elizabeth, what are you working on right now?
Oh, wow. Okay, so my next, what I wish my next book would be, there is a fourth book in the Sensible Shoes. Good grief.
There is.
I shout out about Sharon's book.
Thank you.
It's so great. But there's a fourth book in the Swan House series, and it's called The Wren's Nest. And there's a real place in Atlanta. It's one of the oldest museums in Atlanta called The Wren's Nest. And it was the home of Joel Chandler Harris from Uncle Remus. But, and it is the story of Mary Swan's middle daughter, Nan. And it has been published in Europe and been appreciated, but my publishers over here didn't get it, have not wanted it. And so I'm probably going to self-publish it. And it deals with Reconstruction Georgia and slavery, and in the past and in the present, it deals with trafficking, human trafficking. And so it's a pretty deep and heavy book, but there's always redemption. And that is the fourth book in the Swan House series, when that will come. But the book I'm working on for Bethany House, we do not have a title yet, because the title I suggested, evidently it had a negative connotation. I'll say it. It was called the Sand Pounders, because there's a group, it's about the Battle of the Atlantic. Well, it's a dual time, but part of it's the Battle of Atlantic and the mounted patrol of the Coast Guard, the horses that pounded the beach and watched out for the U-boats, the German U-boats. And it's a fascinating little known part of history. So there's horses, there's a treasure, as a secret. There's the present day is a young woman trying to save her family home, and so that she can develop it into a stable. There's a stable there, and horses for equine therapy. So she's, but the past is her grandmother, who was a wonderful equestrian and stumbled upon a secret during the Battle of the Atlantic. And so I do a lot about the Coast Guard, the mounted patrol, and I loved doing that research. And I'm supposed to come up with a title. So maybe Prints in the Sand, that's a little bit cliche, or 1,000 Hoofbeats. I want to call it 1,000 Hoofbeats because when I was 9, I started a story called 1,000 Hoofbeats. That's a little childrenish. So that should come out in 2022, and maybe The Wren's Nest in between.
Okay. Great. I'll just quickly tag team on that one. What about Sharon's next book? So the Sensible Shoes series, all about kind of inner pilgrimage, and that one is a 4-book series. I'm working on book 3 of my Shades of Light series, which is about spirituality and mental illness. The main character suffers from major depressive disorder and anxiety, and it's all about how if the Lord does not remove the cup of suffering from us, if he does not remove our affliction, how does he enable us to drink the cup? How does he drink it with us? So I wanted to articulate the experience of mental illness with a lot of compassion for those who suffer, and for those who suffer alongside, who feel helpless, long and ache for loved ones who struggle. and just feel the helplessness of not being able to fix, living in the terror of saying the wrong thing or doing too much or doing too little. So I'm working on book 3, and first draft is due January 1 for that one.
Does it have a title? Does it have a title?
Doesn't, no.
Yeah,
so
okay, so yeah, we
and remember
never
me
get
and
the
then
title
time
we
me.
want, right?
Yeah, we hold it with open hands.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, Leslie is asked, how do you keep your characters straight?
Oh, I don't. No, well, no. I mean, don't you love you? We have an editor, and she'll say, your character was blonde at the beginning of the book, and now she's got gray hair. But no,
That happened.
Yes, that happens on pilgrimage, doesn't it? Yeah, I just have I have a Word document, and I have even a spiral notebook, and I write down the characters, and then I do sometimes. I haven't done this lately, but I listed all the first names of my characters in different books, because you don't really want to name a main character the same thing as you named another main character. But I just keep a lot of notes, and I have a person. I mean, I know their personality type. I've used the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, or all kinds of different things, and so I keep a record. Or, do you do the same thing, Sharon?
Oh, I mean, ish.
Yeah, ish. Me too.
Right?
Yeah.
I have friends, novelists, who have bulletin boards with photos of interior houses and what the characters look like. All those, like, I don't do any of that.
No, I don't do that.
I try to keep some notes.
But I try to keep I'll give them a birth date, and know, because a lot of times I'm going back. You need to know your character's backstory, and so I try to keep those notes, but they're not neat. It's like on a piece of paper, and then I clip it in, and so and probably don't keep it all straight.
Yeah, that's great. So a couple more comments as we finish up. A comment, loved the book. This is, I think, maybe from Denise. How long will you be in the US, Elizabeth, and will it be hard to go home due to COVID?
Oh my goodness, what a great question. So we were coming from August till after Christmas. We were going to stay through late January, because 2 of our conferences with our mission had been changed they'd been postponed and rescheduled for January in the States. Then they got canceled. So then we were going to go back in mid-January. But our son, Chris, just got engaged to wonderful Ashley, and they're planning their COVID wedding. And so if it's going to be in the spring, we're like, well, do we want to go back? Because France is closed again. I mean, it's, they're under confinement again, or it might be later in the summer. So we have no idea. Yeah. We just don't know. And we just are so, I mean, we have these 2 worlds we navigate, and we love our life in France. It will be hard to go back. We've got 4 precious grandkids that are here. So we don't know.
And this is how we're living it, right? The whole season, it's open hands. It's just
one day at a time. I mean, right? I think it's how the Lord wants us to live every day.
Yes.
But now we have to.
Yeah. Practicing. We have lots of opportunities to practice.
We have no idea who we're gonna be with at Christmas. It's up in the air.
There we are.
Yeah.
Looks like one other question that's come in here. From Leslie. She says, I would love for you to write books for middle school students so I can get more Christian books into my school library. Sounds pretty healthy and wonderful.
Yeah,
do you think about writing for younger readers, Elizabeth?
I've wondered about that. I haven't really considered writing for younger readers, but I have stories that I wrote when I was young, and I have wondered about going back, because even when I was 9, I had these spiritual elements in my stories, and I wondered if I could take some of those stories but I don't know how to do it, but I have thought. In fact, I just read a little manuscript by this precious 13-year-old girl who's in North Africa. She's the daughter of one of our workers. Wonderful story, and so I love to encourage younger writers. But I can barely write my adult novels, and I who knows, maybe. Thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah, it's a beautiful suggestion. And before we toss it back to Denise, anything else you'd like to offer tonight, Elizabeth? Anything we haven't covered?
Just what I would love if you're interested in purchasing a copy of the book, please support our Liberty Books, which is the wonderful indie bookstore that's sponsoring us tonight. And just how much these independent bookstores, all bookstores, have suffered during COVID. So we just have a big shout out, and I'm very grateful. And the other thing I want to say, and I think Sharon would agree, readers, you make our day, and we are so grateful for you. And don't doubt that. There's plenty of days when probably all of us as writers are ready to just throw down the manuscript, burn it, whatever, and say, I'm not going to do this again. It's too hard. Or the results are discouraging or whatever. And then we get a letter from you, an email, a call, a text, and it's like receiving a hug from the Lord. And it really, really is. And so we're thankful, very, very thankful for your support and your encouragement. Just know, we hope to answer every email. Sometimes it takes a while, but please know that it means a lot, and we're deeply grateful. And so I pray for all of you, and I know Sharon does too. I often, just before the Lord, give me the words for this book to be an encouragement. May it be what it needs to be. And so hearing from y'all that it is a lovely, lovely encouragement.
Yeah. Well said, my friend.
Very well said. And thank you. That this has been a very inspirational talk. And I hope that everyone will pick up a copy of the book. Thank you so much to Mimi Schroeder, who suggested this event. We're most grateful. Thank you for all that you did, Sharon. You're a fabulous MC, and we would look forward to having you when your next book comes out. And it is always a pleasure to host you, Elizabeth. Thank you all. Everyone stay safe, and I hope we'll see you in 2021 with the next book in the series. Yay. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.